Hi, welcome to Write More Light. My name is Sarah, and I'm super excited today to have a first panel on the anthology, These Interesting Times. It's a gift. I've said many times that I was super excited when I first read this this anthology in whole, that it came together in the most beautiful way. And it was kind of a surprise that so many pieces that deal with such hard things could be so hopeful and inspiring. So I'm particularly excited to introduce to you today, change this, Terry Giglio Voss, who wrote about living in Iowa in 2020. It's a timeline piece. We go through the whole year with her. It's really, really beautiful. We learn about her family, and everything we all went through, but also the particulars to Terry's life. We have Monica Flink, who had a, quote, near life experience last year, which is really, really unique story. And I think we're very fortunate to be able to share that story with you. So thank you for that, Monica. David Wright, our sole poet of the day, covered a lot of different topics in his poetry. And Mary Davidsaver, who wrote a letter, and as anyone who knows me knows, I am partial to the epistolary form, to her grandbaby. I'm gonna have a lot of specific grandbaby questions. That's a personal thing, but yeah, so that covers quite a broad view of what happened last year. So thank you all for being here. I will just get to it. My first question is, do you consider yourself a writer? That's for everybody. So let's start with Terry.
Well, thank you for inviting me to this, Sarah. You know, I'm a big fan of Midwest Writing Center. I'm beginning to think maybe I have something there. Writer is a huge name to me, even though it's a small word, but I think I'm starting to feel that a little more. I definitely feel like I'm a creative being on this planet. How about that?
I like that. Now, did you think of yourself as a writer before 2020?
Oh, God, no.
Okay.
Report writer, wrote a lot of reports, but no.
That's interesting.
No, I
change in that regard.
Well, I'm beginning because I participate in these kinds of programmings.
Okay, I'll take that. I'll take that as a compliment to me personally. Monica,
yes,
do you consider yourself a writer?
Well, first of all, again, like everybody else, thank you so much for inviting me. This is lovely. Then I got to take a half day off of work, which is amazing. I do consider myself a writer, mostly because it's something that if it wasn't in my life, I wouldn't feel whole. And so it's part of my integral experience as a human being. And I don't think that being a writer really even requires to be published or to be recognized for it. But if you have that drive and that passion, then by all means, put it out there. Somebody's going to want to read it.
I 100% agree with that. Everyone has probably already heard me say, if you write, then you're probably a writer. But I love that. It's not like I needed to survive, right? It's not oxygen, but I really wouldn't be the same without it.
Yeah.
Same question to you, David. Do you see yourself as a writer?
Yeah. I mean, especially when I'm writing, which isn't all the time because I'm often teaching writing. I'm a literature and creative writing prof at Monmouth College. And so, but I think I'm better at teaching writing when I'm, and so the second half of 2020, I was on sabbatical. And so for the first time in a long time, I had these big stretches of space to write. And that made me remember that I'm first a writer and then someone who teaches writing. And that order of the transaction feels a lot better to me. And I think my students benefit from it when somebody who's practicing this is talking with them about the work that they're trying to do.
Yeah, that's a beautiful point. I love that. That being involved in the process probably makes you a better teacher. And Mary, I assume that you think of yourself as a writer since you have several novels, but please answer the question.
Yes, yes, I do, even though I don't write every day, but I still work at it. I came to this late. I'm a creative person. I was doing other things, and then I came to writing and words, and I keep learning new things all the time in my reading and talking to other people and things like this even. So yeah.
So I probably should have asked this question in conjunction, since I know that you all write. This was not like your first time ever writing, which would be weird, but very, very impressive if it were. Is the piece that you are publishing with these interesting times, this goes for all of you, is it typical of the type of writing you usually do? No, Terry? What do you usually write?
Well, this was a total surprise to me, the piece I did. I have never done a personal essay, and it just evolved from that year. I mean, as we all know, it was a eye-opening, eye-closing evolution of emotional roller coaster that year, particularly for me, because I have children and stepchildren and all sorts of people in my life, and it was just very emotional. So my piece is a very intense piece for me. Generally, I like to write flash fiction. I love flash fiction, short, and try to get your feelings out there, and maybe somebody will enjoy it. I have been working on a novel, and I have a kid's book that's very, very, very old that I worked on. So those are some of the things I do, but I write every single day, except for very recently when my bursitis got bad and I really couldn't sit anymore. But that's my thing.
Thank you for sharing that. I'll add just a disclaimer that I do not write every day, in case anybody feels weird about that. Now, Monica, is your essay typical of the kind of writing you normally do?
It's not. I know you've seen some of my other work. I am a fiction writer. I always have been. This particular piece was just, the culmination of something really amazing and horrible that happened this year. And it's so hard to quantify that with everything that happened that year. I work in education, and to witness how that reflected on so many people, and people you don't even think about when they say, oh, well, I work in education, but I'm not a teacher. And to really encompass how I was feeling and really get back to writing after what happened, this was a great way to do it. I mean, I was truly, truly ill and hospitalized for 2 months. And, to come back to life after that, this was something completely different. And while I don't think I'll often write like this, mostly because I don't think I'm very interesting, I do really like to reflect on human nature. And this was really an opportunity to do that.
I have, I just added a question for you about your piece. It's really, we're not going to talk about it right now. I will get back to this.
Yeah.
I have to ask everybody this question. David, same for you. Is this typical of what you ordinarily write? Whether or not you're a poet, these are different kinds of poems, etc.
I guess I could say two things. Yeah, I write weird poems. That's what I do. I'm not really interested in poems that are just a transcription of a day. I want poems that are musical, that turn, that use language that means several things at the same time, all of that are in conversation with lots of important parts of the world or my life for the texts I read. but I don't trust poems that I'm writing in response to immediate events very much. And these poems, I wrote two kind of groups of poems that were responding to what was happening every day in the lives of people I knew, in the news, around us. And I found myself being super energized by not trying to be perfect in those poems, but by trying to be immediate and present to what was going on around me. Now, the nice thing about the anthology was I got to wait 6 or 8 months after some of those initial poems and fuss with them the way I like to fuss. But no, I don't usually want to write about things that are happening like right now. I don't trust those poems because there's so much cultural or personal emotion swirling around it that you're kind of playing on that. And you wonder, will this last 6 months from now? Will this last a year from now? And I don't know if if these pieces will. It's so cool to be included in the anthology because they're bumping up against all the things that y'all and other people wrote in the midst of that difficult, interesting time. But yeah, so I mean, I guess formally, structurally, this is what I write. But in terms of the immediate subject matter, I'm a little leery of the person that can make a poem happen the day after something has occurred.
We talked last week with the 2 women who conceived of this anthology. And we talked about how different it may be if we had waited 5 years to do this sort of project. And I'm with you, you know, I have a piece in here, which I like now having read everybody's, I'm so humbled. And it, you know, I wrote it in like April. And if I hadn't had that whole amount of time to work on it, I never would have submitted it. It just wouldn't have been complete.
I guess there's writing too. I have to also say though, for myself, there's drafting or journaling that is a way of coming to an understanding of what's going on in the immediate. And that has value for me. I'm never sure if that, like you said, yeah, I'm never sure if that has value for others at this point. Is this something somebody else needs to read? And that's what I want to take my time and kind of think about. And time is a real gift when you have it to sit with something.
Great timing for your sabbatical, by the way.
For lots of reasons. I almost wrote an essay called My Guilty Sabbatical because I was not, like other educators, right in the face of my.
We actually have an essay like that in the book, a woman who had already had it scheduled for winter term. And a lot of her pieces about like, what am I taking from others?
Yeah.
So luckily we still have that story. No, Mary, I know your answer because I've read some of your work, but is this typical of the type of thing that you write, this letter to your grandbaby?
No, I don't think so. Well, other than writing emails, which everyone does right now, we don't write letters that are going out there and you don't expect an instant return on. And I think that's a little different perspective. And that is one of the reasons I chose to do it this way. And I was so glad somebody else did it too, so I wasn't the only one. But yes, and I thought it would help make it a little more upbeat and positive at the end, because the project I started on, I had to give up because there was no ending. I didn't know what was going to happen, and that really bothered me. So this was a nice alternative for me.
It didn't occur to me till this moment, but like maybe really cool to write a COVID mystery. Just a thought, if you're up for it.
There's got to be things we can do. Yes.
Mary is a mystery writer, by the way.
Yes. Cozy mystery, so there's not a lot of blood. Okay.
This is not on topic at all, but like the really special thing about cozy mysteries is like, if you need to relax, like that is the perfect way, the perfect escapism, I think.
Okay.
Thanks for that.
We'll take that.
Okay, I'm gonna try and keep this question short, but I do want to know this from each of you. And I don't know this about any of you. How did you decide to submit, and Did you write this piece already, or these pieces? Or did you write specific to our call for submissions? Anybody can go, or we can keep doing it clockwise.
You know, I'm pretty sure that parts of it was written out of my writing every day, but I think I started to tailor it once. I think it was Missy who said, "Hey, we're doing this thing," and I said, "Oh, well, maybe." And I think I started to tailor it, about when I heard about it, thinking that maybe it would be a good thing because it was a fundraiser. And I really love to do stuff for fundraisers besides always just donate money or buy something. So I thought, oh, what the heck? I'll give it a try.
Yeah, for those who don't know, assuming we make money off of this book, we'll be donating, I don't remember the portion of the proceeds, to the Quad City Disaster Relief Fund.
I was writing these poems. I'm a binge writer. I write obsessively and then go back. So I was writing these poems. I have so many of them that the fun part was picking 3 to send. And
did you only send 3?
3 or 4, something like that. Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure whatever the number was that we required is what you sent, but I was trying to.
I probably had 24 poems or more that were trying to do this sort of thing. And so I was so excited to see, and I wanted to connect. I live down, south of quite a bit south of the Quad Cities, and I wanted to connect with Midwest Writing Center since I came here in 2013. And that's been difficult to do, to get up there for events and that kind of thing. And so it was a really neat opportunity to say, oh, here, I have some things. So I was glad to be selected.
I can categorically say that we're very happy to have you.
Thanks.
Sorry for interrupting you, Monica. Go ahead.
So, okay, so this will reveal more about me than anybody needs to know. But I started writing something about my illness because my therapist told me to, because of course I'm in therapy because I'm 30. And I mean, look at everything. I'm in therapy. So
tell me more about that.
And so I started writing it because I was trying to deal with it, and I was trying to accept what had happened. And when the call for submissions came up, I'm like, oh, I know something that horrible happened to me this year. Let me get this for you. Yeah.
I feel a little guilty when I did the graphic for the call. I just wrote 2020 was a disaster. And the women, the powers that be, were like, we don't just need sad stories, Sarah. Thank you. I'm glad that you wrote it. I'm glad that your therapist told you to. Yeah. I too am 31 and in therapy. So let's normalize that. Now, same question to you, Mary. Did you write this on your own? Did you write to submit? How did you decide to submit?
Yes, I did. I was requested to submit something. And like I said, I went this way because it was a little positive, more upbeat. And yes, I have a psychology degree, so I know therapy, okay? A little bit anyway. But yeah, I enjoyed doing this and having this opportunity. So, yeah.
So I'm actually really glad that we talked about the potential catharsis of writing, because I'm going to ask about that later. But now I'm going to go straight into my person-specific questions, just because that's the way I've ordered my questions in my notebook. And also, if I'm leaning this way, I'm turning the page. My notebook is sitting against a picture frame, so it's standing up. Let's start with Monica. You wrote, you've already said about an illness that happened to you, that you had. And a lot of people wrote broader pandemic, derecho, murder hornets, protest pieces. You sort of answered this a little bit already. How did that experience, that illness, color your memory of 2020? And how did you choose that as the piece? I guess you answered that, that you were already working it.
Yeah, I was already working on it because I was dealing with the entire scope of it, because there will never be a go back to normal for me again. It is living through the new normal and accepting it. And part of that is really, I decided to write about it because, well, everybody had experienced life under COVID-19, and everybody experienced witnessing the horrible things going on in our world, and everybody experienced murder hornets and fake news and everything else that happened. And this happened to me, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm the best person to write about this. I am unequivocally the expert, so I should probably write about that. As for how it reminds me of 2020, I'd actually admit that I have fonder memories of it than I should, mostly because what happened to me made me realize that there is a lot of good in the people around me, especially the people that probably were getting on my nerves at the time. And it just brought out the best of everyone around me. And how can that not be a glimmering light?
That's so fair. I would also like to ask, what time, what month or whatever did this stuff start in? I know I went to the emergency room one time last year, and it was like the scariest experience of my life. And you had that in there, and I just started being like, because emergency room during COVID, like very scary.
Yeah.
So what time of year was this? I'm sure that changes it a bit.
November through December 2020.
Happy anniversary.
Thank you. Still alive, so be having a party about that next month. But yeah, it was November 15th. Of course, I'm going to remember the day. And yeah, I mean, I'd never been to the ER before. I was not the kind of person that had ever, been in the hospital, been to the ER, and I had to do it all by myself because they don't let anybody in. And they don't let, and there's not the comfort that there normally would be, because the nurse comes in and, smiles at you. Well, she might be smiling, but she's wearing a mask, so you don't know. And you don't have the kind of rapport going on. And admittedly, I was super duper high on drugs. So I don't... Maybe they were really nice. I don't quite remember, but
So
I did say some really horrible things. It's cool.
In case it's unclear, Monica had what I think most of us would call a near-death experience. But what's really great is that the piece is titled Near Life and talks about how that scary moment can give you new perspective and new life. And that's, new life. And that's something really special, I think, maybe true of the anthology as a whole, but to you four in particular, you all managed to stick a lot of hope in your pieces, which I don't know, I find that impressive and difficult in general. I'll move on to Terry. Thank you so much for sharing that. Your piece is so personal. I'm really grateful that you let us in that way.
Thank you.
Terry, your piece is a timeline, which we have a lot of timelines, and it's really cool how different they are, because we all know that we started hearing stuff in like February, and stuff got really real in March, and we know protests really hit ahead in June, but because these are people's real lives, they're all very different month by month too. So Terry, your piece starts out hopeful and ends the full year of trials, tribulations, and a couple of triumphs. And it ends hopeful too. So I'm wondering, is that intentional, or is it like part of the product of reflecting in this particular timeline style, or maybe you're just a really positive person?
Well, at one point in the year, I definitely wasn't an optimistic person, as we can tell. You know, in reflection towards the end, I think I felt a profound sense of gratitude. I think by that time we did have a vaccination. But it was an adjustment year for me anyways, because I was just getting used to living in Iowa. I'm not originally from here. And my husband and I decided on Iowa because it's kind of the middle of the country. And he's from here. And he baited me with all these wonderful grandchildren who are a big piece of my piece. And they've been an amazing piece of my life. And unfortunately, we couldn't see him anymore. All of a sudden, we were alone and isolated in our house with our sickly dog. And it was an intense year for us, for sure. I think that possibly I really am an optimistic person, but I'm not afraid to look. I think when you get to be my age, 66, and maybe Mary's catching up with me, you start to see life differently. And you count your blessings more frequently. I was really super fortunate in so many ways to even be here at all. So yeah, I think I have that, but at one point in this story where you'll be reading it, I think I lost it. I lost everything at mental health, and I didn't get sick, but I felt it. I felt the pain and the suffering of all people. It was overwhelming. It was overwhelming to see that much suffering and terrible things. I think that the George Floyd thing really was a huge for me. And I think it was for a lot of people. It was just like inhumane. The whole world felt inhumane. So, and then of course it goes on with what happens with my son, but it's intense. It was an intense year. And I don't think I was aware that I would ever live through anything that condensed and that intense. It's usually, I look back and it was 10 years of that kind of stuff. And we're really looking at maybe 9 months of that year that was a nightmare. And, compared to, a lot of people, it was, for my life, it was nothing. I still had roof over my head and food in my stomach and love in my life and a sweet little dog. And I was still traveling a little bit. Nothing compared to the horrific, mind-boggling suffering of people and animals and all the other things. And for my son was caught in the fires. It was terrifying to see animals. Oh God, I don't want to bring it up, but you know what was flashing in the news, but to have someone that close to it was terrifying. So it was a roller coaster year for sure.
Thank you. Mary, I have you next. And my most pressing question is, do you get to see your grandbabies now?
Yes, last week, in fact, we had an emergency call. It said, you've got to come help us out. She's sick. We have to go to work. And yeah, so spent 2.5 days out there with, a feverish little girl and trying to get her to eat.
What a terrible blessing. Okay. I'll ask real questions about your writing now.
Okay.
So here's an important reflection that I had when I was writing questions for you in particular, was that I know you a little bit, from the center, and I had no idea, I didn't realize how you must have struggled with no access to your family. I knew you had a grandchild, but it just, being stuck in my own world the way we all are, as we've been so isolated, reading your piece just brought me so much insight and just empathy for the world at large. And I think that that's an important factor about the anthology. We may know each other, but from such distance, we know so much less about what our friends and acquaintances are going through, even if we talk every day. The collection is shockingly eye-opening. And I always figure, I have a general empathy and understanding about the horrors and wonders of the world. But I learned so intensely from reading this that I am just not aware of what anyone's going through. So that was a special thank you to you, Mary, as someone that I knew before and still knew nothing about. Now, a real question for you. As someone who has a soft spot for epistolary writing, my question has a bit of a bias toward that end, but you wrote this letter to it's a granddaughter?
Yes, granddaughter.
Do you intend to share that with her? And if so, how did you decide to go about writing this?
Well, like I say, it was kind of, okay, one thing didn't work out, then I thought about this and I thought, okay, she needs to know a little bit about what was going on, because, you know, a 1-year-old, less than 1-year-old has no memories. And no, I think around 3 to 4 is when we start having real memories that we can remember as adults. So I wanted her to have a little bit of my life during this time, because, okay, I'm older than that, okay, than Terry. And yeah, who knows what's going to happen? You know, we were in quarantine, we tried to be as safe as possible. So yeah, we kind of kept to ourselves. But still, you know, you never know what's going to happen next, especially when you see it in the news, what really bad things can happen. But I wanted to give her a little bit of a personal experience of me, of her life at this stage. And I was trying to be conscious of the other grandparents also, because we were much closer. They're all on the East Coast and they have bigger obstacles to overcome to get to see her. But we all shared the Zoom meetings. Well, it was Skype, I'm sorry. And yeah, we got to see her and it was just so much fun because she turned into a little actress. You know, she had the smile that, you know, you put on your face when you know you're on camera. And, you know, she would just go and be busy. No matter how she felt, she would just race around and play with different things. And it was just so cute because it was a performance, you know, and he could tell. But still, it was part of her life and her development. And it's going to be unique. It's, you know, at some point, you know, all these kids coming up with this, different experiences. So I wanted a little bit of that for posterity.
That's really beautiful. I wish I had that from my grandparents, you know. I think.
Yeah, there's so many questions you forget to ask or don't know to ask, and then they're gone.
Well, just you've given her a concrete piece of your love, and that's something you don't know you need until you need it.
Well, like I said, I didn't know I'd be a good grandparent.
She does in the piece. She says that she wasn't good with babies. That's one of the first lines. It's really funny. I mean, given that, you know, she's a grandma.
Yeah, I grew into it. Okay, so yes, and it's nice to know that's comforting for me. That, you know, I'm not totally an imp.
I'm sure you're excellent.
I have.
No, go ahead.
No, I have help. You know, being a parent, you need to have 2 people. Being a grandparent sure helps having 2 people because, you know, you approach things differently. And, you know, yes, it helps.
David, your poems cover a broad swath of experiences. I think there's 4. I didn't bring the book with me. I'm at my folks' house right now. Like I said, my sister's in town. So I didn't bring the anthology with me to double check, but hey,
look, I just scrolled through it. There are 4. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you. You managed to have both personal and universal experiences represented here. And I want to note the title because I kept trying to say it earlier and interrupt you, which is, you called it Poems from a Book of Consolations and Litanies, which is awesome. You do have both in there. And I think that that's a really, consolation is such a apt word. It's not so much about like celebration or positivity, but like consoling. So the first question is this part of a bigger project that you're pursuing?
Once I figured out that I had a lot of these, because it was a way of coping, and then I thought, yeah, this would make an interesting chapbook of poems, maybe. And so I started thinking each day, do I want to write today a litany, which is a version of a prayer. I used to be more religious than I am these days, but that form, the listing and of concerns and narrating of experience and hoping for some kind of intervention still is a natural impulse for me. And then the consolations, the idea that I wanted to offer to myself or to other people some sense that others are paying attention. You know, it's sometimes most times you can't console someone by fixing anything, but you can console someone by acknowledging and witnessing and being present for whatever it is they're struggling through. And it took me a long time to figure out the fixing was a bad idea. But because you're not fixing it, you're just trying to make yourself feel better. So the idea that you might try to console yourself, others, that you might make a list of these hoped for interventions became a way of every other day thinking, what could I say to myself or other people today? And a poem is a natural form for me for doing that. I mean, for me, a poem is an embodied, sensuous experience in language. It's not an intellectual experience primarily. It's as much a physical experience as it is anything else. It's language in your mouth, on your tongue, in your heart, the beating of it, all of that. And I felt so disembodied in some ways during COVID because we were all on a screen doing this all the time, that I wanted to think about what it meant to be a body in the world, to remind ourselves that we were these, and of course we knew we were bodies because we saw all the fragility all around us, whether it was the damage being done particularly to African-American men and the protest of that, or whether it was people's bodies responding and being ravaged by COVID, or whether it was all the rest of it, So yeah, I guess that's a long-winded way of saying that these forms for me were ways of trying to stay embodied in a space where our bodies were being dissipated across screens rather than gathered together, because it was impossible really to gather together. When I used to go to church, one of the things I appreciated was when the officiant, the pastor, whomever would say, "We are the body gathered." And we weren't the body gathered because the only way we could gather was this way. And that felt like a profound loss to me.
You have some particular moments that you drew upon, because you mentioned church, I'm going here, including Easter services, the sensation of wearing a mask, conversations with your son. Were those, I mean, you said that, no, I'll just ask it this way. Were there like triggering events for each of those, or was it just part of your processing?
Almost all these were triggered by some immediate experience or set of experiences. Sometimes when you're writing, though, then you end up collecting from 2 or 3 experiences to make the poem, right? So I think we all had the experience at some point of having our mask on and looking into the eyes of someone who didn't have a mask on and thinking, this is normal but weird. And is this person aware that they don't have a mask on? And oh my gosh, why are you trying to kill me? And all of these sort of extreme or surprised responses. And so I probably in some of the poems am synthesizing some experiences, but yeah, these are all things that happened to me in 2020, you know. That's at least the generative part for the poems.
So later this week, I'm going to do an episode on documentary writing, writing to document what's happening in the world around us. And I would say that each piece in the anthology probably constitutes as documentary writing. So for the four of you, what are some pros and cons that you can think of for documentary writing, and or why do you do it? I said earlier, you know, we often just accept that there's a cathartic element to writing, but probably that's not a universal truth. So how do you feel about this? About documentary writing, about catharsis, why it happens, anything? How wordy I am.
Well, I think one part of documentary writing is really that there is an innate human need to be heard. And it really gives us a way to be heard when so much is going on and you can feel so small in the middle of all of it. I think probably the worst part of it is that I may not have told my mother how badly I was ill at the time. So when she reads that, that's going to go well for me. So, you know, there's also the truth comes out kind of thing. So that may be my feelings on it, but it's just personal there. So.
Sarah, I don't think I thought about that as a documentary writing. Now that I think about it back, yes. And one of my favorite things in the world are documentaries. I love the films, I love the writing. I think that they're one of the most important ways of collecting events and not being just straightforward historical timelines. So I think it's a really important thing. And I think what Monica just said was super important, is that we need to have that feeling of significance in a complicated situation. I think we all I can think of is we were all, it was worldwide pain that connected us, and fear for our fellow human beings. And I really think that she hit it on the head when she said, oh, this is going to be the thing that this is what makes us vulnerable, and we're vulnerable together. And I think that that's what happened here. It was a bigger picture. And when I heard about the anthology, I thought, this is where we need to talk, to speak.
I think that what I'm hearing both of you say something that really is really, really powerful. The need to be heard, the connection we have with other people when we're heard and when we hear them, all of that. And I think that one of the reasons I'm drawn to poetry, and creative nonfiction does this, fiction does this too, is that poetry can be a documentary of the interior. So it's not just a documentary of this stuff happened in the world to these people in this way, which is very important to know. But sometimes poems document the interiority, the emotional life, the life of memory, the sense of things that's hard, that's ineffable, that's hard to say. And poetry tries sometimes to do that, and then to attach it to the world out there so others might have an experience of it. And I'm really excited to read through again. I mean, I scrolled through it when we got a proof copy of it, to read through again in my hands the whole anthology, because I'm hearing this interiority. It isn't just an external thing that happened to us. It's a powerful existential internal thing to feel this separated from others, or this at risk, or this connected to things happening to other people. And yeah, I look back at the poems, or look back at the things other people have written during that time, and I think, wow, that was just a lot distilled. You said earlier, Terry, that there was a lot distilled into one year that usually is a 5 or 10 year kind of thing. And that's a lot to carry inside of us. And so writing, if it is cathartic for the writer or for the reader, often it's that interior thing that's being kind of brought out, purged, whatever. Yeah.
That was really beautiful. Also, I wanted to add, Terry, using the word condensed was so good. What a great description of, you know, a lot happening all at once. Mary, did you have anything to add? You don't have to.
Well, something Monica said about, you know, her mom's going to find out a lot more about what happened. I can relate to that possibly, because I know I didn't reveal all of my experiences to my mother, and I know she didn't do it for me either. So we had this little dynamic going on, and it's sad. It's sad. And what I don't always write from a personal point of view. I did a lot of posting on Facebook and, you know, a blog, but I was focusing on writing, things connected with writing and my experiences. But in the last year or so, I really have dropped off, and it's like, I almost went into hermit mode. But I respect people and admire people who can reveal the personal side of their experiences and their emotions and their memories. Okay, it's really important, and yeah, glad you can do it. I'm still working on it.
I mentioned this earlier, but I want to present it as a question now. How do you think your piece, or maybe the anthology as a whole, which probably you haven't seen all of, I know it was sent out, but how do you think it may be different if we did do it in 2025 or 2030? Your piece, or, you know, the project as a whole?
Well, I would encourage you to do some kind of a follow-up.
I think it would be very different.
2025, to have some of the writers from this anthology look back and say, here's what I thought I was doing in 2020, and here's how that reads to me now. That would be really an interesting, even if not a whole book, a set of blog posts or something would be very cool. Or then to have some of these younger folks that we were talking about, whose lives have been shaped. You know, my son has been online for most of 2 years of his high school experience, and he's a junior. And now they're back in person in safe circumstances as best they can be and whatnot. But my high school and college experiences were so shaping of me that I can't quite envision or understand the difference that might mean for him in 5 years. Like, I want to read what he writes in 5 years about this and other people like him. So if you can revisit this in 5 years with a set of responses to the pieces here or new pieces, that would be
another reason that I think that would be a really cool project. Of course, you know, I clearly have no idea where we'll be in 5-10 years. But there are a lot of voices that are missing. And I think the reason for that is, like, we're still coping, we're still dealing, you know, we're still in the pandemic, for one thing. There's still a lot of consequences of, you know, ending that eviction moratorium while people are still unemployed, things like that. And those people likely didn't have the time or energy to write, and they still have stories to tell. But outside of my personal desires for literature, please, the rest of you answer.
No, I'm glad we did this now, because I don't think there's a lot from the era of the pandemic in 1918, 1919. And yeah, we needed to do this. So I'm glad you did it now. Who knows? Yeah, like you say, what's going to happen in 5 years? And we're going to be different people.
I want to thank you for saying that, because I was wary of doing this publication in the beginning. I'm embarrassed to admit that. But having the immediacy of it, I think, will make a huge difference, because in retrospect, we have different feelings, and we remember things differently. So you're totally right, Mary. This is going to be really, really valuable. Monica, Terry, do you have any thoughts? Again, don't feel obligated.
Yeah, I think it's great that we wrote it now, if only because time has a way of numbing things and mellowing it down. And maybe we don't feel as strongly as we do right now in 5 years about the topics at hand. And it really, as Mary said, it's such a valuable thing to get that written down and have it for when we do start, the memories of it do start fading and we're overwhelmed with whatever comes next. And, you know, people that were saying, oh, well, 2016 is going to be the worst year ever. And I'm like, well, obviously those people needed to wait 4 years. And, you know, it could be the complete same thing in 2025, or it could be completely different. And to have this now, we really get the purest form of what everybody's going through.
Purest form, I like that. And I think it's more immediate. And I think that's what will make it powerful. And I think it'll sting where it needs to sting, and it'll keep reality where it needs to be. And I don't know, I have read a lot of the pieces, but I can't say I've read them all. And I'm looking forward to sitting down with the book and eating it up again, because I know how important it is to have these collections of human experience and share it with other people, because it makes them more aware and understand more when they're heard.
I want to say I more or less read it in a sitting several times in a row. It's really intense. I don't recommend that method. But interestingly, it came together. It's in alphabetical order, just I think by virtue of that being the easiest way to do it. But it came together in that order in a really natural, really beautiful way, which is sort of unexpected. And I do recommend reading every piece. I can't really believe myself saying that, but it's a really beautiful collection. There isn't one that I would be like, but maybe not this one. Which, I mean, how often does that happen? Even on like your favorite album by your favorite band, you still skip one song. So my final question, then I'm going to ask y'all for something to leave us with, unless we get something in the chat. I already mentioned when we did the call for submissions, we used the word disaster. I had a baby talking to me. We used the word disaster, and I don't think that any of you wrote into that idea or like really strongly believed in the idea of disaster in your pieces, despite writing, you know, of hardship and challenges. They were very, very hopeful pieces. Can you talk about what may have given you hope, or what may continue to give you hope during these interesting times?
I do think that this title, the disaster piece, truly there was disasters. And when I think of disaster, I think it never resolves itself. We were fortunate as Americans, maybe more than other countries, that we had more resolution to it. And I was surprised by the interesting times. I thought it wasn't strong enough. I thought it should be something more, I don't know what it would be, but I just felt like, you know, the years before this were so confusing and so convoluted that I thought, well, and then I decided just to set that aside and just roll with what was happening with me. And and just put it out there and see if it fit with what other people were writing. What I think I'm hearing is that it did fit. And I was happy about that, especially when I read some of the pieces, and the young man who read his piece at the last reading, that was a phenomenal piece. I can't name it or the young man, but it was beautiful.
I was going to ask, I did clarifying questions, but I'm not going to. I do want to say, you know, when we had our internship last summer, the 2020 Young Emerging Writers internship, we gave them a prompt using the term or the phrase, these challenging times, because we were hearing it constantly in every single advertisement and on TV. Like, people weren't willing to name what was happening. So I assume that the title of the anthology came from that, but without having to say these difficult times or these challenging times, because we don't want to put your experience in a box. I did not title it, but that's my understanding of how that came to be. Mary, it looked like you wanted to say something.
Yes. Okay, my neighborhood was without power for like 4.5 days after the windstorm. And when I had my book launch party, I made it for my neighborhood as kind of a little cul-de-sac. And I wanted to give away copies of this book to people. So I had a drawing, okay? And so I bought extra copies so I could share with my neighbors, because we all went through a lot of the same things. Some people lost family members to COVID, and just a lot of different things that we shared. And I wanted this to be an emblem and, you know, a symbol for it. So I'm looking forward to when we actually can have them in our hands.
I always thought of the phrase interesting times as having to do with a kind of joke. You know, the idea that if you ask to live in interesting times, you'll be sorry. It's more of a curse than a blessing. And I've heard that attributed to lots of different cultural sources, but that's kind of, when I read it, I thought, oh yeah, may you live in interesting times isn't really a nice thing to say to people. And the other thing that comes to mind too, I grew up in churches that were obsessed with the apocalypse, and realized later in my life when I, for example, went through a divorce, that we all have these little apocalypses, you know, these little disasters that sometimes are huge for us. And it might be the loss of someone, or the end of a relationship, or a job, or a natural phenomenon like the derecho that comes to people. And you don't have to wait for some great big huge apocalypse to happen, or from, we all have these disasters, these difficulties. And as you were saying, when you read through the anthology, you were like, wow, look at the disasters, the difficulties that I didn't even know people I knew were wrestling with right now. And so I do think there's something about recognizing that. And perhaps the hope comes in saying, well, this time it wasn't me, and I'm going to go ahead and try to spend what I have still in a meaningful way, because this wasn't fully my disaster this time, you know. And maybe when I am going through mine, somebody else will come alongside and console or attend to that. So I don't know. I mean, yeah, I didn't use the word disaster, but I certainly saw plenty of them going on around.
That was really beautiful. We all have these little apocalypses. It's just.
Excuse me. I actually think disaster is a fantastic term, not just because it encompasses what has happened to us individually as a group of human beings, but it also encompasses, I mean, we think of a disaster and we don't just think of the devastation. We also think about the fact that it brings out the best in people afterwards. We think about the people that take in the homeless and care for innocent animals that are caught up in it. We think about the people that are, you know, saying, hey, come to my house and charge your electronics. You can tell your loved ones you're okay and take a shower and get your laundry done. We don't just think about the bad things. We do think about the hopeful things when we use the word disaster. And from what it sounds like, the anthology does that as well. So I think it's an apropos title for it.
Thank you. That was my final question, but do y'all, any of you, all of you, each of you have a final thought you'd like to give to folks who are watching with us?
Buy this book, and if you're not sure you want to buy it yourself or can afford it yourself, request it from your local library. They will buy almost anything people request. Go to your local independent bookshop and say, and for mine, it would be Wordsmith, which is a newish bookshop over in Galesburg. Go there and say, hey, would you stock 5 copies of this? And I'll come give a reading, and I'll get a couple of other people to give a reading, or we'll do an online reading. The book won't make itself magically in other people's hands. Maybe we can't all do what Mary's doing and buy copies for our neighborhood, although I think that's a fabulous idea if you can afford it. But
yeah, I just realized I have 2 little free libraries in my neighborhood. That's an idea.
Stock them up, but also call your campus or public library and say, this is an important document for you to have for the next 20 years in your collection, so someone can pull that out and say, oh my goodness, this is what.
As Mary said, we don't have anything like this from the 1918 flu pandemic.
Yeah,
this is a time capsule. I'm so delighted by that. Thank you, David.
Yeah.
Yes, buy the book, share the book. It's Christmas presents for everybody for this year. And my dog did survive. Here he is. For you who wondered if he made it.
Puppy got sick in Terry's story.
In my story. Oh, he's still sick, but he's so much better.
Good. Well, I'm going to go with everybody else. Buy the book. Remember, it's rectangular, so it is easy to wrap. All right, I'm putting that out there. So everybody's like, how do I wrap this? Well, the book is the perfect gift because it is super easy to wrap. And sorry about the crunching noises in the background. The cat decided to eat while we were doing this. So that's me not putting myself on mute. So I apologize for that.
I didn't notice, but ordinarily I have cats climbing on me because they know how to open doors. So I feel you.
Yeah.
Well, it wouldn't be a Zoom, or yes, it wouldn't be online if there wasn't cats and animals around and little kids.
Yeah.
So yes, that's all part of it.
Well, Sarah, thanks to you and the good folks at Midwest Writing Center for just the perpetual energy towards the writing of people from this region. It's remarkable that organization not only existed during the pandemic, but seems to have thrived and offered to readers and to other writers a chance to be, as you folks said, heard, witnessed, listened to, connected. And that's just a real gift to this whole region and to the writers and readers.
Thank you so much. I can say for sure that Ryan and I, Ryan, the director, have always been more invested in the accessibility of art than really anything else. And I'm really glad that that's seen and appreciated. Thank you. And thank you all so much for being here. Your work is an absolute gift. And I'm really excited that you guys pushed that idea into my head, the literal gifting, because holidays always stress me out, and that seems like an easy deal. And it is really, really beautiful. I would say, maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm not supposed to say this, but we're hoping to have an audiobook. So it'll be even more accessible. But really these pieces are so special. Your stories, the 4 of you in particular, are so special and so beautifully written, heartfelt. I'm so grateful to have you here today. Thank you. I'm just gonna sign off.
Thank you, Sarah. You're very special, and you were my lifeline through a lot of last year, and so was Midwest Writing Center. So thank you.
Thank you. I will be back on Thursday with documentary writing right here, same time, same place. And then we're gonna have a second panel, that'll be our last panel, I think, from a new group of writers next Tuesday. Thanks as always, and please write more light into your life.